Good morning, School of Tomorrow, folks. I wanted to suggest areas of research, especially if you're into literature. Let's say we're doing American literature. There's the Quaker connection here, of course. I was just noticing today that the here we are in Quakers, the lighter side. So that's an example of a Facebook group with a religious kind of, some sect has got some cult, somebody. There's a lot of these Quaker groups. So this one, in this post, I'm just noticing that the old, edgier version of the Mary Dyer story has been completely redone with a completely different story. And I said to the friends here, hey, you might want to grab the older one before it disappears, because Comedy Central now has it unlisted. Right, this is the older one, and she kind of makes a crack about Jim Morrison's music. Let's listen to that one. This is now missing from the newer version.
Unmarked grave. She changed the world, but you'll never hear about it anywhere but here.
Well, no.
She's in an unmarked grave on the Boston Common. And you know whose grave is marked? Fucking Jim Morrison. People fly to Europe to see it. And he wrote horrible music.
Anyway, that's the old version. The new version is a completely different one, and this one's unlisted. So I want Quakers maybe to download the old version before it disappears. So here's like a practical thing. So if you're sharing with students in their personal workspace about all this file management stuff we've been talking about, right? I often go to the command line, and I kind of favor a POSIX command line, right? So here we are in a Mac, sort of an older OS X. This is not a brand new Mac, far from it. This is I picked it up at an Asian market for just a few bucks. Actually, more than just a few bucks. But anyway, this is me downloading the older version, right? And I just have to give it the specific command here. And this is what we call POSIX format, right? So in Python, you have like Python libraries that will, if you want to write your own utilities, and it just gets longer and longer as to what all the options are, like what you're seeing down the left. If this makes no sense, don't worry. It's just what we call a command line, a command that has a lot of different options, more than I've ever used or will ever use, right? This is an amazingly long list, actually. But the program in question here is YouTube-DL, and it's for downloading YouTubes. So another place you might want to do some research is, how does American Transcendentalism connect up to stuff? Because we're in literature, remember. We've got a lot of mathy content, but right now with the Bucky Fuller as a New England Transcendentalist, and his great aunt Margaret Fuller, and so on. Let's see, what do I link to there? Is it to like a Wikipedia article? We talk about women's writings. Okay, so like my blogs, I'm always jumping around and talking about all these literary traditions. And I welcome you to visit. All you have to do is like go to Grain of Sand, for example. We've been looking at that as a resource page, and search on like Transcendentalism. Now, one theme of this blog and of my talks has been like my own career, like it's autobiographical. So I had a Walter Kaufman as one of my professors, and I've noticed like connections between, say, Critical Path and Nietzsche. And what would those be? Like, what would you say right off? I won't immediately like pause the video and think about it or something like that. Then Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is what we were looking at the last symposium I went to on Bucky Fuller with Ed Applewhite and others. Jay Baldwin was there. Joe Clinton was there, as I recall. That was a symposium that was right up against a PyCon, a Python conference, in the same building of all things, in George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And the symposium had wrapped up, and the PyCon was just beginning, and I was to give a paper. And that's when I got the bad news from my wife, who didn't come on that trip, that she had been diagnosed with advanced cancer. Just boom, overnight. It was one of those kinds you don't detect until it's kind of too late. Anyway, I just had to bail on that conference. And so I got to know some people from doing that. In other words, when you have to suddenly disappear, I didn't get to meet with Applewhite again for that reason either. That was the last time I saw him. But I shot back to Portland, and people remembered I had to do that. And especially Steve Holden remembered that. He was the organizer of PyCons a lot, later became chairman of the Python Software Foundation, and also, since he and I became really good friends and he really liked Portland, he actually lived here blocks away for some years, right? He got a chapter of Portland life, which was pretty good for all of us. I certainly benefited in that he helped me land a position with the O'Reilly School of Technology, for which he was a curriculum writer at that point. So here in EuroPython, this was prior, or this was later, I'm sorry, this was later in 2008, and my wife lived until March of 2007. I'm going to Vilnius, Lithuania here, and I have this interesting paper I'm taking with me that seems far-fetched. Looking back at the time, it would seem far-fetched, but I think if you've been with this curriculum for a while, it doesn't seem all that far-fetched from my angle, right? Connecting the dots, American Transcendentalism meets Pythonic math, because you already know that included in American Transcendentalism, from my point of view, is what was at one point thought of as a possibly going to be in free verse, the synergetics. And Applewhite talked him out of that. But Bucky was like a poet in the New England Transcendentalist tradition. I don't think we can seriously argue against that. He was other things besides, right? A certified architect, machinist, whatever. But I wanted to begin my bridge between some of this literature and its geometry and computer programming. So I'm not going to read this here or, go through it even very slowly. I'm going probably too fast for anyone to, but I'll have a link to this if you want. And it's partly I think, because I had a front row seat with Walter Kaufman as a professor of philosophy there at Princeton, and this is a time when the previous summer, let's say a summer before I started hanging out with him or started to take his classes, I forget exactly which summer, but towards my senior year, he had done this S training, and I talk about some of that here in this paragraph because of all these connections. Anyone who's followed the story closely, the Bucky story, knows that he had an overlap and co-appearances on stage with Werner Erhard and stuff. And since I had, thanks to Walter Kaufman in part, started sampling what was this that Kaufman was excited. He was kind of impressed by the training. He thought it was a pretty good thing because it was philosophy in action, right? Hard-hitting philosophy. Kind of a philosophy lecture meant to be existentially challenging, not just academically existentially, but existentially. And that was pretty powerful that someone could throw that together. And so we're talking about American Transcendentalism in the classical sense here, but also in pulling it forward into the Bucky era and making the same links I've been making in recent talks between, say, Hugh Kenner and the Pound era and Bucky, because Hugh Kenner here, he's a famous or well-known James Joyce scholar, for example. He wrote a biography of Bucky called Bucky, right? And some work on geodesic math and how to use it. And being on the humanities side of things, being a professor of literature, I think that shows you again that the tent anchor that I have here in literature with math content is pretty secure in the sense that it's been carved out now for some time. In other words, Hugh Kenner helped get the ball rolling in that regard. So I go through history of Python some here, and basically this paper could be a good starting point for some people who want to pursue the overlap between Python programming, object-oriented programming, and synergetics. So that would be a good starting place. And again, that will be in, let's see, where are we? worldgame.blogspot.com, and just search on like Transcendentalism. And I've actually got that now as homework here in my Facebook profile. For those of you who are following this through Facebook, some of you are. Here we have, okay, there's the drunk history thing. Here's a direct link to that blog spot. And here's my slides of the Vilnius experience when I was at the EuroPython there. One of the couple EuroPythons I've made it to. I have not been, I haven't had the time to go to every PyCon or EuroPython by a long shot, but I'm really grateful for this opportunity to go to Vilnius that time in 2007. It was a great experience. All right. Let's talk again soon.